Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast, joined by Rania, Khalek. And we're also pleased to be welcoming Lee Camp, who's the host of Redacted Tonight on RT. He's got a stand-up special right now, not allowed on American TV, that you can watch if you go to his website. Also, I encourage you to make a donation if you end up watching his special. And he has a book out, Bullet Points and Punchlines. So welcome to the show, Lee.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And, where to start? I mean, obviously, we don't have a lot of stand-up comedians on our shows, probably. Right? It's fair to say, Rania, that we don't do a whole lot of unauthorized disclosure podcasts with comedians. So it's great to have you joining us. I mean, it's a wild and crazy world out there, and I suppose we're just wondering, like, how you've navigated this over the last 6 or 7 months as it's impacted, your ability to do what you do professionally.
Well, it's funny you say you don't have many comedians, but I am basically not allowed on the shows that normally have comedians. So the places I actually get to do interviews are like, shows like this or shows with journalists I respect and things like that. They're the ones willing to actually care about the stuff I cover and things like that. Whereas the traditional outlets for comedians are like off limits for somebody who actually questions the corporate state on a daily basis or is anti-war or talks about, Palestinians and things like that. That's like, even though they would never say it, you're never going to hear from like a late night show like, oh, we don't have any comedians that defend Palestinian rights or like, but the only places I can get on are actual journalistic shows like this one. Yeah, it's weird right now. You know what it reminds, this shifting from that aspect to everything revolving around the election right now and Biden and Trump. And it reminds me of Dylan Ratigan left MSNBC years ago. And he said the reason he left was because they were gearing up for the Obama McCain, I think it was Obama McCain run. And basically, as MSNBC does, they were like, look, you got to be pro-Obama or you got to at least be pro-McCain. And then, at least you got to take a stance. Is it McCain or Obama or whatever? And he was like, I'm fucking done with this. I can't do this anymore. I can't just defend this awful system anymore. And so it feels a little like that, where it's like, everybody just wants it to be one. Are you pro-Biden or you pro-Trump? That's all there is. That's all there is in the world. What is it?
Yeah. And so, I mean, obviously, like, I guess we'll hit it because in the past week, we've seen that they have picked. We're done with the Veep stakes. We're done with waiting to figure out what this is going to be. And to me, it seems like it's kind of like anticlimactic because it doesn't really amount to much. It's what everybody was expecting. And I suppose, like, what are we all supposed to do? I mean, Rania will have her thoughts that are substantive and such, but to me, like, I kind of have a superficial one, which is like, I mean, how great is it to get this out of the way and move on, because it had just dominated so much of our conversation. And now, I mean, I'm like, every day of this year has almost been like, can we get to this election day so that we don't have to bother with this shit anymore?
Well, I would think what you're speaking to is that it's not just this moment, it's the election cycle in general is used to distract from 90% of what's important in the world, the core issues of our country and the world, the military industrial complex, prison industrial complex, big pharma. Like, you just go down the list, and the election sweepstakes that, will subside after the election for 6 months or something, and then they'll start talking about who's considering for next time. It's used aggressively to distract all of America from anything else. That's not to say elections don't matter and people shouldn't vote. They should vote, but it's amazing the success they have. It's just covering everything with the mud of let's talk about elections. And speaking of Kamala Harris, obviously she's just like the worst pro-corporate, pro-war, pro-prison industrial complex candidate you could come up with. There are other, if he wanted it to be a woman of color, there are other women of color who would have been an actual sign to whatever progressive wing of the Democratic Party remains that they give a shit. But of course they don't. They just want to nail anything that, you know, support anybody who supported Bernie Sanders or supported Tulsi Gabbard. They just want to purge all of that from the party and just be a, you know, anti-worker, pro-military industrial complex party. And so, you know, Kamala Harris fits in perfectly with that.
You know, I'm wondering your thoughts on like the fact that the last 4 years could have been a time where comedy could have like flourished. And instead, I feel like for the past 4 years, the mainstream comedy that we see has all become this sort of generic, like cookie cutter thing where like it's all the same. Like all of it's the same. Like, I mean, I know, you know, I'm sure you don't like sit and watch late night shows, but I'm sure everyone does sometimes. And they all make the same jokes and say the same things. They're all about Trump and Russia. And, you know, Trump is owned by Putin. And we have to get behind Biden. And it just seems like even 5 or 6 years ago, like comedy, even mainstream comedy was a little bit edgier. And now that's all gone. Is it like, what do you think about that? And also, is that more isolating for you as somebody who's always been on the edge of it?
Yeah, I mean, even back during Bush, so most comedians don't want to be nailed with the moniker of political comedian. So, and most comedians don't care, you know, they significantly about the issues. They maybe care a little on the edges, but for the most part, they got into comedy to make people laugh. And that's fine. There are great comedians that are not political. But during certain times, like when Bush, the second term of Bush, you know, comedians start to feel they have to have a couple of jokes about how awful Bush is. So they put a couple of jokes about how terrible Bush is in there. And then they consider that, you know, their edgy political commentary. And, you know, with Trump now, almost every comedian, if they walk up on stage, feels a need to throw in at least a couple of, Trump's a maniac, right? And I don't view that as like significant political comedy. I view that as like a little sign that I'm aware of what's going on in the world. But I get bored with that really quickly. And, you know, this isn't to say I don't have Trump jokes. And in fact, I had a lot of Trump jokes when he first started running back in 2015, 2016. And I was saying things, you know, they love to act like RT is all pro-Trump. I was saying things far harsher about Donald Trump before he won the election than CNN or any of them, as they were giving him 23 times as much coverage as Bernie Sanders. But then I get bored of it. It's like, all right, you've talked about what an idiot is, what a narcissist, what a, you know, compared him to Adolf Hitler 100 times. And so I move on, both because I get bored with those jokes and because I think that everybody needs to care about something much deeper than just the presidency. Like there is so much that humanity is capable of, so much we're dealing with. And if we're just talking about Trump, we've already lost the discussion. We've already lost the debate. And so I still have a Trump joke here and there in my show, but I don't focus on it. And yeah, it is frustrating. It is frustrating that then some comedians consider themselves dangerous because they had 2 Trump jokes or whatever, or the other way they view themselves as dangerous is just because they have politically incorrect jokes. You know, like the one I saw the other day with some guy throwing around references to how Michael J. Fox has a shaky, you know, hand or whatever. And it's like those type of things make comedians go like, oh, I'm so dangerous. I make people feel uncomfortable. And it's like, no, dude, that's not dangerous. Dangerous is when you're doing the type of comedy and the type of issues that like literally get you banned from almost all of cable television. Like, you know, I couldn't get, you know, comedians, these dangerous comedians have Netflix specials. I couldn't get Netflix to return a phone call. Like I've got, you know, as with you guys now, I've got things plastered across my YouTube saying, don't listen to this. It's dangerous. And it's like, that is actual comedy that is not allowed by the corporate state. The politically incorrect, he made a joke about women, that's actually promoted by the corporate state, as long as you aren't doubting the core issues of how our lives are owned by a ruling class.
Yeah, that makes sense. Since you mentioned the warning labels, that's an interesting topic to move to. So what you were referencing is how YouTube has these scare labels that they've been doing since, like, I think it started in 2017, maybe like after the election, under the guise of like, oh no, all this election interference, we have to label state media. And so YouTube labels RT or anything even like lightly affiliated with it as it will say like Russia. The RT is owned in whole or in part by the Russian government.
And then links to a ridiculous Wikipedia article.
Right. And then also, but it gets even better because it'll say, like, I think Al Jazeera says something similar, like Al Jazeera is owned in whole or in part by the Qatari government. Same thing with CGTN, the CGTN is owned in whole or in part by the Chinese government. Then you get to like Voice of America, or you get to like PBS or NPR. And it's like, this is a public broadcasting network. And then you'll get to BBC, and BBC, which is actually literally the same kind of setup as RT, says like BBC is a publicly funded like organization or something like that. Like it doesn't even say British government on it at all.
And British people have to pay their BBC fee every year.
Yeah. So it's like a completely biased, labeling system. It's obviously meant to like make people like you seem scary, so that if somebody's watching it, even if they like it, they might not share it because they see this like warning label. And now we have actually Facebook has gone even a step further and labeled it, like at least YouTube does it like, sort of to like most media that receives state funding, but Facebook only does it to Chinese and Russian affiliated media. And their label is crazy. It says like on their pages and on every single post, like Russian state controlled media or Chinese state controlled media. And that's an even crazier label because it literally said they're saying that the state and the government officials in those states actually editorially control this media.
Right.
No other media has that label. I mean, Voice of America literally is controlled by the US government.
Right.
Like they're open about that. Their mission says that. And even like Trump had like some crazy firing, like he went and fired a bunch of people and put in place people who like him like a few months ago. Like it's way more controlled by the government than any of these other outlets. And that has no label. So it's just, and now Twitter's doing it too. Twitter, and they only applied it to Chinese and Russian affiliated media. They haven't applied it to any other media outlets. Like they're claiming that in the decisions, like if you look at the criteria for labeling outlets, it's all subjective. Like it's like it leaves so much space for the actual company to just be able to label what they want arbitrarily. So like it's up to them to decide without any evidence how controlled by a state a media outlet is. And so at Twitter, they've determined that BBC isn't controlled by the state, but RT is. They actually say that, and they're right about it.
Right. I mean, it's so ridiculous. It's just complete and utter horseshit. I mean, so you have the first thing about like NPR and stuff, which is run by the U.S. government, funded by the U.S. government. But the head of NPR is now the former head of Voice of America, and Voice of America.
I didn't know that. Know that.
Voice of America is the official like propaganda radio of the U.S. But then you could take it even a step farther and say, well, why doesn't like CNN videos say this is largely funded by weapons contractors or big oil or something? Like you could take it a step farther with that. But yeah, and this serves multiple purposes. One is that it just scares people. Your average person sees a little label saying Russian government. And in fact, as you do with your stuff, I write and research all of my own stuff. I've never been told what to say. I know. I've never been told what to say. I've never been told not to say something. Like it is the Russian government plays no role in my show. And yet you still have this warning label across YouTube. that even for the people that are fans and they're like, I know, I've been following Lee Camp for 15 years. I know he writes his own stuff and everything. Even for them, they're afraid to share this stuff because they share it and then they've got to get into a debate with every idiot on their feed about how no, he's not told what to say or whatever, which is, this is all by design. But I think another point to make is there are kind of two kinds of this suppression. One is the in-your-face suppression, which is these labels and the actual purging of pages, which we saw, what was it, a year and a half ago, where they got rid of 800 Facebook pages at once, including Police the Police and Free Thought Project and so many others, anti-media. They just purge them from Facebook, purge the editors from Twitter simultaneously, meaning there is collusion between Twitter and Facebook to get rid of these pages. So there's the kind of in-your-face suppression. And then I think even kind of more insidious is the behind-the-scenes suppression, which is clearly going on. Like, I've been shadow banned at Facebook. I have a large Facebook page, 335,000 followers. But since the last election, it never goes up. I used to gain 2,000 a week, and now it cannot go up.
You're like stuck. Yeah, it's like you're stuck, and I think it's definitely like at the end of the day, all of this is meant to like deter people from watching and sharing content that challenges like corporate and government narratives. That's what it's about.
Yeah.
And it's really sad how it is effective. Like, it's really effective. And now like all of these Silicon Valley companies are so integrated into the national security state. They all have these team of advisors that like used to work for the national security, for Obama's national security department or something.
Yeah,
like
the Atlantic Council.
And they have the Atlantic Council advising them, which is literally funded by like the US government and other governments like the UAE and like a bunch of weapons companies. So it's like this really underhanded way for the US government to actually like control speech without like technically controlling speech.
And yeah, absolutely. And I think it shows the actual weakness of the empire. Like, when you are this worried about the slightest, idea, questioning why there's 1,000 military bases around the world, or why there's, why Big Pharma owns our cures, when you're this worried about information getting out, it shows a weakness, a crack in the armor for just an completely overstretched empire that can no longer take care of their people, can no longer provide them with a good life. And so the only answer is to crack down on that thought. And they saw this getting out of their grasp, getting out of their shackles back during Occupy, during the Bernie Sanders movement, even the Donald Trump movement, even though I don't agree with him. This was all the narrative was getting out of the hands of the corporate state, and they felt an intense need to crack down and make sure this stopped, make sure things like Occupy stop. And they haven't stopped, but they have decreased in the amount. The only kind of national one has been Black Lives Matter. But that one had at least for a while, had the promotional help of the mainstream media, largely somewhat because they care maybe a little bit about police brutality, but more importantly, they viewed it as a way to hurt Donald Trump. Since Occupy, you haven't seen this because at least in the last 4 years since Donald Trump got elected, because there's been a massive crackdown on how social media works and whether things can go viral, whether thoughts and ideas can go viral, whether people can share stuff that's dangerous to the ruling system.
It's funny, like they've gone even so far as to be afraid of TikTok, which is like the least political form of social media there is. I mean, TikTok, it's like my outlet Soapbox, we have a TikTok account and we're trying to grow it, and it's grown quite a bit. I mean, since we started it, but it's really, really hard to actually do a viral post that's political. People on TikTok, like TikTok is these 1 minute or less videos that, like, if you ever use TikTok, like, it's a little bit young for me. and I like don't really enjoy using it because it's like you watch videos on it and they're so short you forget what you watched, and a lot of it's just nonsense. It might make you laugh for like a second.
Well, that speaks to the ADD
Yeah.
like distractions culture we live in.
But the like it's really, as far as social media is concerned, if you're going to be this empire where like the slightest challenge to your authority to destroy the world makes you like freak out, TikTok is the least offensive place because it's all people dancing. And like,
I know people kept telling me to join, and they were like, "It's dance videos," and I'm like, "Why do I need to join?"
I'm not gonna. I can't. Also, I can't dance. Like, I'm not the best dancer. The point is like, I can just imagine like some CIA operatives sitting like in an underground bunker, or no, I'm sorry, some like CCP operatives sitting in like in an underground bunker watching, spying on American TikTok. Like, like all the intel they're gonna gather on Americans and their dance.
The dance styles of Americans. Well, this goes to show how afraid they are of China, because American society, when you've gutted all the workers' lives to the point that everyone's collapsing under the weight of it, you can't be innovative. You can't allow people enough freedom to actually think and create, and so we're losing out to China. And as
a result, it's so funny. Like, it's so funny to me because I think a lot of the TikTok antagonism from the Trump administration, after you see that Microsoft is in talks to buy it so that it can continue to exist in the US, it ultimately was just like theft of a Chinese company that was successful. That America's like, all right, we're just gonna pirate it. Like, we're just gonna steal it. We'll threaten to ban it, and if they sell it, then we get to have it. Like, it's just like one of our social media companies can have it. So it's like in a way, like the US is beginning to do all the things that it accuses the Chinese government of doing, like intellectual property theft and like stealing companies. Now that's what they're doing because they can't create their own shit for the reasons that you just said.
Right. And then the same isolationism when it comes to, creating vaccines and cures and stuff. They're like America's like, well, if another country gets the vaccine to COVID-19 first, then we think they should share it because that's the moral thing to do, and we'll buy it from them. But if we make it first, we're hoarding that shit, and you don't get any of it.
Well, not only that we'll buy it from them, Trump like made some offers to buy every single vaccine they make so no one else can have it, even if another country comes up with it first. Like, that's what we do, man. Our government just like freaking steals everything and hoards it from the world. Like, we tried to do that with like masks because we weren't prepared for this pandemic. Like, it's just,
they were hijacking flights. Planes headed to France with like masks and PPE were like taken over
from their own allies. They were like stealing it from Germany. Like, they stole they confiscated PPE from the Germans, and the Germans are still like, America, what do you want us to do for you? It's so pathetic. So pathetic.
If
Kevin, do you have a raging TikTok? Everyone wants to know.
Yeah.
Do I have a raging TikTok? No, I do not have a raging TikTok. I'm not a dancer either, although I will dance, but I'm not going to dance on video for the good of this Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, you don't want to like reveal your secrets through dance.
Yeah.
Right.
The CCP.
Right. If I could be a little bit of a comedy nerd, I hope you'll allow me to be. You come from this tradition.
Please, do you see my nerdery behind me? There's Dick Gregory and Bill Hicks.
Absolutely. You come from this tradition of like breaking down language as like a big form of the comedy that you do, which is something I wanted to acknowledge. There was an episode that happened in the last couple of weeks that I want to get to, but my first question on this is, it's interesting when we think about state affiliated and state controlled and these labels that are being applied. And then now in the context of seeing how YouTube has incorporated this rule into their content that they're going to allegedly protect people from interfering in the elections by taking down any videos that reference hacked or stolen materials. And on one hand, a very serious point is that I know from my coverage that a judge in New York actually defended the right of journalists to publish hacked or stolen materials under the First Amendment from the insanity of the Democratic National Committee that was hysterical about Clinton campaign emails being published in 2016 and just wanted to do whatever they could to string up and hang anybody connected to the Russian government and WikiLeaks, et cetera, et cetera. But these labels are really kind of fascinating to me because Julian Assange has made the point as well that that Mike Pompeo talks about WikiLeaks as being a non-state hostile intelligence agency, but they're really they do hold themselves out as being a non-state media. But it's really amazing to me because you see the government shrinking and shrinking and shrinking what's allowed for media. You see where I'm going? That like you can't be non-state media and you can't be state media. So what can you be?
Yeah. And the other thing, which I think I try and say it as often as possible because I don't think most people even still now know it, is that WikiLeaks never published anything false, has literally never retracted a word. It's all been true. And yet they're the ones like imprisoned because they're so horrible. It's like CNN or Fox News can't go 30 seconds without saying something provably false. And yet WikiLeaks is the bad guy.
Yeah. And then the episode I wanted you to speak to, I'm really eager to hear what you thought, because I think it goes back to Rania's question about the degrading, the degradation of comedy that has unfolded over the last 5 to 10 years, and it isn't what it's not what the intellectual dark web, as Michael Brooks would describe it, was thinking these right-wing people who complain about free speech and how you can't say things that are politically incorrect. It's not that. But a good example of this was back in July. I don't know if you caught this, Lee, but there was this guy who used to be in the Clinton White House who came onto Twitter and he wrote, "George Carlin is timeless and still speaking to us." And then he shared this video that had been made by a bunch of Democratic hacks that was putting up his famous, it's a big club and you're not in it bit. Yeah. And put this to a bunch of video that it didn't really have Biden campaign stuff in it, but it looked like a Biden campaign ad. And it also had all of that like really scary, frightening images of Trump and Mike Pence and all those characters that people have come to fear as monsters while he was pushing this message. And first, it was just insane to me that George Carlin was being pushed by a Democratic strategist of all people, simply because I don't know if you remember what we lived through in the last year related to Joe Rogan, but it apparently, if you quote something from a comedian, you own everything they ever said. Like you're responsible for knowing that person has been like offensive at some point in their life, and you need to fucking own that. And so I immediately remembered that he had this bit about voting and how he would rather stay at home and masturbate because at least after he got done, he would have something to show for it. It's and anyone who's a fan, these are probably his 2 most famous bits. But it was amazing to me that they were picking and choosing and sharing this "you're not in a club" bit. It's a big club and you're not in it bit, but ignoring the part about voting that is actually relevant to elections.
Well, and it's a big club and you're not in it. Of course, he meant the club that includes Biden and the Democrats and the Republicans
and him.
All of so yes, they're completely bastardizing what he meant. And it reminds me of the time that who was it? Paul Ryan? Was it Paul Ryan who said his favorite band was Rage Against the Machine?
You're right. Yeah.
And then Tom Morello had to come forward and be like, "Dude, you're the machine, asshole."
There's been this whole thing during the pandemic of like people waking up to find out that Rage Against the Machine lyrics are political. And I mean, it's absolutely incredible. I mean, I didn't think people could listen to that kind of music and not pick up on it. And the same would go for that comedy. So, I mean, to me, my biggest peeve about the last 10 to 20 years in the evolution of comedy is that it seems like every time anybody does political comedy, they want to include the targets of the jokes in their material. They do this thing. Saturday Night Live is like the best example where like they'll do a bit like Sean Spicer, the Sean Spicer thing with Melissa, where she did the bit of Sean Spicer, and then at a certain point they brought Sean Spicer on the show so that he could actually be a part of the bit. That was like disemboweling him.
Right. Well, I mean, I think what you're getting at is it's not really disemboweling him because it's making fun of little, dumb things he said or little quirks and things like that. But it doesn't actually get to like, hey, these people are sociopaths and they're destroying lives. And that is why they're okay with being friends with these people. That is why they can have a Sarah Palin on the show and fawn over her because she's a celebrity. This used to amaze me. Like I remember one time I was performing in New York City and this it's kind of a political sketch show, but they have a stand up at the beginning. And they said, hey, will you come open for the show? Our guest live in the studio, or not studio, the comedy club, is Mike Huckabee. And I was like, yeah, I'll open the show, and I didn't tell them this, but I made fun of everything Huckabee stood for. Like any stance he had, I just tore it apart. And yet when Huckabee got up there, and these are New York liberals, they're not Republicans. When Huckabee got up there, they're fawning on him. They're cheering for him. They can't believe that a celebrity has come to their little comedy club to be in their little show. And the questions they asked him for the interview were like, so you wrote a book. What's that like? They're not getting to like, wow, you want to destroy lives. How's that going? Like, and this is, Hedges actually said this about Daily Show back when I think he was asked about it back when Jon Stewart was still hosting and stuff like that. And he was asked whether these political shows are important, what they're doing, are they really changing minds? And Hedges said, well, not really, because they'll poke fun at the foibles of the leaders. Isn't it funny that this guy tweeted this or this guy said that? But they won't get at the heart of the matter. They won't go after the corporate state or the military-industrial complex in a large, substantive way. And that's why they're allowed on these networks. That's why Viacom is a fan of The Daily Show, And so I totally agree with that. And it's also why, George Carlin, although he was allowed to be on HBO, and this was a young HBO when it wasn't as powerful as it is now, when he became more political, he was largely pushed out of they weren't having him on many TV shows much. And he achieved his fame, as with Lenny Bruce, as with Richard Pryor, achieved their fame without being anti-corporate or that political, not strongly, harshly political. So they got that fame, and then they had their shift where it was kind of too late. Like Richard Pryor was the most famous comedian in America. You couldn't now turn him off and not air his specials because he was talking about serious racism in America. Whereas if he were a young, no-name guy talking about those issues, they never would have allowed him to get to that point. Same with Lenny Bruce. And Lenny Bruce actually became so threatening that they chased him around America, imprisoning him, literally arresting him for things he said on stages. And then they destroyed his livelihood by threatening any venue he was going to play with taking away their liquor license or arresting the owners. And so he had trouble finding even places to perform at. And they had him going to court every day to try and defend himself. And ultimately, he OD'd on drugs. And so I basically view it as the U.S. government chased Lenny Bruce to his death. I mean, that is really what went on. And so that's dangerous comedy. Like, that's when you're being dangerous, not when you're on the late night shows saying Donald Trump sucked Putin's cock. Ha, ha, ha. Look, I'm homophobic, but I'm also liberal at the same time.
There's also, like, I think it's interesting that the most successful mainstream, or maybe not most successful, but the most up and coming mainstream comedian right now is this girl, Sarah Cooper, whose entire comedy bit is just like lip syncing Trump, meaning that Trump is her writer. Yeah. Like it's like Trump is like writing it for them. If that makes it's like that's like the most like
Well, and
that
yeah, that's
embodies the comedy of the Trump era is like
well, that's the perfect example. It is making fun of the things they say without actually getting to the heart of it, which you're just repeating the thing. One of the most famous political comedy sketches in the past 15, 20 years was on SNL when Tina Fey impersonated Sarah Palin and just gave real lines from Sarah Palin's speech, gave
Right.
no criticism whatsoever. And I admit it was clever because it made everyone realize how stupid Sarah Palin was with her own words. However, it again was not going at the heart of these issues. Why it is that we have so many homeless in America, the richest country in the world. Why it is that what is it? 50% of people go bankrupt instantly when they find out they get cancer within the next 2 years. Like, getting to the hearts of those issues and going after the corporations that run the things, that's not allowed. Just lip syncing Trump is certainly allowed.
And let me just help you sell a few books, I hope, by mentioning that I do find it impressive that you have these people who are part of comedy royalty, or at least in the lineage of it, who blurbed your book, which is an encouragement for people to get their hands on a copy. I mean, you have Rain Pryor, you have Kelly Carlin, who's George's daughter, and you also, before he died, you had Paul Krasner do a blurb for your book. A lot of people don't have any idea who Paul Krasner is, right, which is kind of disappointing to me. But I'm actually, and I mentioned it on the show, and I think it was even a bit too shocking for Rania. But the parts left out of the Kennedy book is one of the most amazing things that most people have no awareness of that was ever done. Yep. People don't really know that he had this Realist magazine, by the way, that was not just a pioneering satirical publication, but also gave a lot of space to the kind of news publicating, kind of writing that we do, the kind of stuff that you see at like Consortium News, or that you see at the different alternative media websites that are very well known. I mean, he was working on expanding access to abortion clinics for women, and that was a huge deal for him. So
for those who we don't need to get into the gory details, but for those who don't know, he's a satirist who wrote things that people believed. Like, some people believed these were actually excerpts from the Kennedy tapes, and that is dangerous comedy. Like, people ran around the country trying to make sure other people did not see this and did not read it. And he also helped create the Yippies with Abby Hoffman, and a very, very important pivotal figure.
Well, let me ask you to the serious question, just your opinion, because I've done my own experimenting, writing satire, and I actually had something that I wrote that ended up being taken as true, and people were coming at me as like potentially being irresponsible. And the actual example is that I wrote this thing mocking the idea that George Soros is somehow funding Antifa. And it's one of the most popular pieces that has ever been published to the Shadowproof website, where I write and contribute, and somehow it's my responsibility that people figure out that this is satire, but it's labeled. I actually labeled it satire, which to me kind of undermines what I'm doing, because I wish people could detect it on their own. Right. But I included the disclaimer. So why should I be responsible for others' stupidity?
I don't know that it's your responsibility. It does suck that we live in a time that people are so eager to grab anything that supports their lunatic fringe viewpoint that they'll grab satire and say, look, here it is. I found the proof. But yeah, I mean, I really love certain kinds of satire. And, I think we're increasingly living in a time where, like, things like the original satire, Jonathan Swift's Modest Proposal, if you were to put that online, I think Twitter would ban you for life for recommending the eating of babies. So yeah, we're, like you said, we're getting in it's shrinking. The amount of allowable thought is shrinking. And I find myself I'll use satire on my show because I feel like people can see the entire context of the show and everything and understand. But I rarely tweet satire or anything because I know that some fucking, half-brained idiot is going to run around and say, oh, Lee Camp said such and such. So.
Yeah. Now, another thing I'm curious what you would have to say, just because you spend so much time on it, is I'll let Rania get back in here. I think this is kind of like the stuff that you do that really speaks to what we're doing on a regular basis with Unauthorized Disclosure. You're one of those rare comedians who does go and cover what U.S. foreign policy is up to. I mean, I think it's important to make that point. We kind of made that point, but for the most part, I can say this about John Oliver's Last Week Tonight, that I have a lot of respect for the people who are writers on his staff that are doing the domestic stories, the explorations of prisons, policing, the drugs, the war on drugs. They've done some tremendous things on public defenders. I really appreciate that work. But anytime you leave the United States, it is cringe-inducing what they are about to come up with. But because you have that perspective and you have that eagerness to take it on, you do really good comedy around coups, that the U.S.-backed coups and our support for wars.
Yeah, I mean, I try and jump off, the great stories that are put out by, you guys or Gray Zone or Mint Press or actual good journalistic sites. I try and use that news to create, comedy bits that make it clear what the reality is, not that confuse people. And it really is sad to see other comedians. I used to know John Oliver back when we were both in New York. We performed on a show or a couple of shows together at Edinburgh Fringe Festival. And one of the nicest guys I've ever met. I think back then he wasn't saying anything I found repulsive, and one of the most talented comedians I've ever seen. And I don't know what happened on the show. He launched his show within 2 weeks of when I launched mine. So we started at the same time. And for a while, we were covering similar topics without even realizing it. Things like civil asset forfeiture, where the cops are now stealing more off America's streets than the people are stealing off America's streets. He, like you said, domestically, he's done some important stories. And then, and he chooses the timing is also infuriating. He'll wait till we're like ramping up for Cold War with China and then do a 17-minute let's trash China piece. Mm-hmm. And then he'll wait till they're ramping up for like invading Venezuela, and he'll do a 20-minute Maduro is fat and stupid piece. And it really is so infuriating to see. And it's tough to know how much of it is him just thinking that anything published by Reuters and The Guardian is just the utmost truth and unimpeachable, or whether it is he knows the truth and he's just willing to do that form of propaganda. I don't know. I don't know what the reality is, but it certainly is infuriating. And I think it is really insidious, because it's a lot of people who watch his show are people that care about human rights issues, that care about the police brutality in America or the corporate exploitation in various forms. So then to slip in, hey, also fuck Venezuelans, is really sucks.
Yeah, everything sucks. It's a depressing time. It's like, I just want this election to be over so we can move on with our lives. Like, it's like there's so many bad things happening, and I feel like it's only going to get worse. And I feel like it's such an opportunity for people to like really get like for people to really have an understanding of who the real enemy is, which is this like ruling elite that just starves us all. But instead, I feel like
Can I
Yeah, go
ask
ahead.
you something? I just want to ask you something. Like, to me, there's a very serious similarity between the catastrophic explosion in Lebanon and that horrific corrupt ruling elite and the explosion of coronavirus in the U.S. by our pathetic ruling elite. Like, to me,
I think
very
think
similar.
you're right. I think it's like the rot of neoliberalism. And I think Lebanon, like a lot of third world countries, has a more extreme level of that because of like history of like de-development, lack of investment, colonialism. A lot of third world countries are today like ruled by a like you have a sort of this like neoliberalized dystopia. All neoliberalism is dystopia, but have this like extremely neoliberalized libertarian paradise kind of economy where like the people in charge just like steal from the public coffers and there's no actual like development of infrastructure and there's just complacency and stupidity and negligence and incompetence to such an extreme degree that you can get like an explosion like what happened in Beirut. But I think you're absolutely right that this is not necessarily unique to Lebanon. The degree of it and the local consequences of it might be unique, but this is actually like a part of a neoliberal system. And you
Yeah.
see aspects of that in parts of the US, like look at Flint, Michigan, like
Yep.
where they poisoned their own water for profit and like it was like negligence and competence and greed on the part of the local government. And like you see situations like that across the US. And then with coronavirus, it's on this massive scale. And I really do think that the Beirut explosion is like this sort of extreme consequence of where neoliberalism takes us. And it's just like a decay and a rot. That's like that until we actually engage with and have like society at a fundamental level understand that transcends party, it transcends who's in charge, like nothing's ever really going to change, it's just going to get worse. And I feel like whereas maybe 4 years ago I feel like there was more understanding of that and more opportunity to like discuss that. I feel like now there's less because now everything's become so much more rigid because of 4 years of Trump.
Yeah.
And the way that like resistance has been co-opted to mean like Russiagate and like all this really superficial stuff. And also like people like us end up getting warning labels. So like fewer people watch us and there's less opportunity to actually like have what we're saying heard and our perspectives heard. That I feel like there's like less I feel less hopeful now than I did 4 years ago. And maybe that's really depressing. I'm always such a depressing, negative person on our podcast. So maybe somebody can speak to the opposite of that.
At the years I've known you, you always have so many smiles, though. You're always all
I
smiles.
smile, but I'm just more cynical now than I've ever been.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are a lot of really exciting things happening, but at the same time, it's like we just don't have the sort of organizations we need, the sort of media we need, the sort of like infrastructure as a left that we need.
Well,
to
they've been
these things, you know?
they've been aggressively and successfully gutted. I mean, by design over the span of many decades, and unfortunately, it's been successful. And I think that yes, things are dire, but it is quite possible that things have to get this bad for people to realize how fucked up the system is. Like maybe this is needed to create great change. Because I don't think they would allow large scale change without things getting really awful. And I'm not rooting for them to get awful, but I do see that could be a silver lining.
Yeah, I'm usually the like rosy one, just so you know our dynamic, Lee, that like I come in with this like optimistic spin, mostly because like that's kind of how I live. I'm this like disappointed idealist, right?
So what's your optimism right now?
Well, my optimism is that in the last weeks we have seen really powerful incumbents in the Democratic Party lose and those people are Elliot Engel, who got beat, by the way, by Jamel Bowman, who I love to share because he has this photo that he put out of him wearing a face mask that has the Wu-Tang Clan symbol on his face. And to me, because of how regressive the Congress is, I just love the idea that there's this like unabashed open Wu-Tang Clan fan from New York that has been elected to represent. It just, I don't know. I mean, that's how stunted we are as a society and our politics. Like that, to me, I distill that as some kind of sign of progress, that like there's an actual human being stepping in to this position who actually has tastes that resemble other people.
Well, and the other small light of optimism is the squad has all won their primaries,
Right.
and I think it goes to show how the good ideas are infectious, and people that the very few. I mean, how many are there? Maybe 6, maybe 5 Democrats that actually are true progressives, and but their ideas are infectious, and people really get behind them, and they're very hard to stop for the corporate elite to stop them once they're in there. That's AOC is probably one of the best known Congress people for the Democrats right now, and it's because those are actual ideas that are not accountable to the corporate elite, at least for the most part. I mean, she's got some tarnishes on her record, but for the most part, and you see how infectious those are. So the establishment Democrats view those type of things as very dangerous.
Like the thing is that they're losing. I think there's this really like evidence that they don't know how to control this insurgency that is within their ranks. And there's a very limit to what they can do with them. They think they can still throw money, and we've seen millions of dollars being spent in these races that have not been able to pay the kinds of dividends that they normally would have, and everything is so brazen. And I don't really know if it's going to actually amount to much, but you have movements to say that like, and they're largely symbolic. I'm not going to give it too much more importance than it really has, but it matters to people who follow these politics, who are quarantined in their homes right now. And so people saying that they're not going to sign on to a Democratic Party platform that doesn't have Medicare for all is actually a huge fucking deal. And to me, having survived the election madness that has gripped our country for the last decades, the fact that they would do this and not convince themselves that it's going to tarnish Joe Biden is like a huge thing to me, because usually they don't think they can walk and chew gum at the same time. Like they don't think you can dissent on ideas, but also just be like, we admit our system does not allow us to make choices, so we're going to have to go with the not so horrible guy over the like monster that is in our system.
Yeah, we got to hold on to these small wins.
But even more inspiring to me, if we're going to try to go out on like a hope-filled note.
How about I'll give you a big hopeful thing. Fossil fuels are fucking collapsing. All right. They're pulling out of these pipelines because they can't invest billions of dollars that they don't think they're going to get back. Fracking is nearly over. I mean, oil has to be at like what, $60 a barrel for fracking to be profitable, and it's nowhere near that. So fossil fuels, I mean, granted, I think our government will probably bail them all out, which will be horrific, but fossil fuels are really collapsing big time. You have people on CNBC telling everybody, yeah, not a good idea to invest in the fossil fuels because that's not where you're not going to make a lot of money back there. And so that's a big deal.
Well, the last thing I'll add is that this movement that stepped in after George Floyd was murdered by the Minneapolis police was like amazing to me. They actually got there was a column on the pages of the New York Times, of the fucking New York Times, about abolishing the police, about like Bret Stephens,
yeah,
who's a bug, is on the New York Times. Like there was a column written by Miriam Kaba, who is a amazing abolitionist who this is the kind of stuff that like I can't even imagine being in the corporate press. And because it was so out there, this idea of getting rid of prisons and doing away with police, there was a chance for her to write a piece dealing with this like open and honestly. And I guess it's another opportunity for me to again plug your special, because this is something that you bring up in your recent stand-up special about exploring that, how we could get to a place where we abolish police and have less prisons, or abolish prisons because of just how negative and awful they are in our world, which we've seen. I mean, it's something that I've seen with COVID-19.
But one thing I've always wondered about the whole like abolishing prisons is what happens when the leftists take over and we need a gulag.
Yeah, there's got to be somewhere to put Trump, right?
Right? Like, there's got to be some sort of loophole here for when we're in charge.
But
sorry,
that's all right. But Kevin, I think you're making a great point, which is that kind of our job, even if it means that we are forced out to the nether reaches of the internet and labeled and as scary and, basically put out into the digital equivalent of Siberia, our job is to make a space for those ideas so that they catch fire a little bit, which then catches fire more, which then allows corporate media, the bigger players, to have the room to start questioning pushing the Overton window and questioning the what's considered the norm. I mean, you would not have a defund the police movement in this country without so many people toiling for years and saying that and having everyone scoff at them and go, oh, he's a maniac. He wants to defund the police. She wants to defund the police. And yet here it is, all of a sudden it's burst forth as a national movement. And I think you see this again and again. I mentioned fossil fuels. Many of us have been saying, stop, get rid of fossil fuels, stop using fossil fuels for years, and have been mocked and ridiculed and pushed off to the side. And now it's, I saw an article on Vox, the other day saying, here's how we can quickly be done with fossil fuels in America. And it's like that type of thing wouldn't exist without the people toiling off to the sides and being beaten and tear gassed, creating the idea viruses, the idea parasites that allow it.
Yeah. Well, it's been really great to have you on our show. We've enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, this was fun.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And you have a couple other shows that you do, right? You have a couple podcasts.
Yeah, I've been terrible at promoting things that you've tried harder than I have. But yes, my comedy special is free at leecampamerican.com, or just go to leecamp.com, my regular website. Also, my book is now 20% off with the coupon code, the initials of the title, BPAPL, bullet points and punchlines. And that's at leecampbook.com. That also helps a small indie publisher, PM Press. And then best place to find all my stuff is leecamp.com. But yeah, I have two podcasts, one with Eleanor Goldfield called Common Censored and one with Graham Elwood called Government Secrets. And Redacted Tonight is all on YouTube and steadily being suppressed into oblivion.
That was funny.
Well, Rania and I have both been guests, so
yeah, thank you guys.
It's a really great show, and you're such a needed voice in a time like this because you're able to do something really unique, which is to tell people what's happening, but also make it a little bit light, so it's not like how I say it, where it's like we're all gonna die.
Well, no, Rania, your trick is that you say we're all gonna die with a huge smile on your face.
I'm like, we're all gonna die.
You're all gonna die. And then people are like, yeah.
We're like, yeah, but we'll be happy while we all die.
Yeah, you just gotta smile through it, man.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, we'll have to have you on again soon, but until then, thanks everyone, and I got to remember to plug my show. I did more plugging for Lee. I got to remember to plug us and make sure that people support us. So if you go to patreon.com/unauthorized disclosure, you can become a subscriber of the show. And that would be great for us because we can keep doing this on a weekly basis. So until next week, thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.